Our final speaker for today is Claire Welsh, who's going to be joining us on Zoom. Claire is a research scientist and cropping system agronomist with CSIRO at Narrabri, and she's going to give us an update on her project of CRDC's Modern Systems Agronomy Project. So I'll hand over to Claire. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi everybody, can you hear me okay? All good?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'd like to start off today and just say thank you to Liesl and the CCA board for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all. I'd like to think that I've crossed paths with quite a fair number of you over the past 3 years, but for those that I haven't, my name's Claire Welsh. I'm a research scientist and cropping systems agronomist here at Marvale with CSIRO. And I'm also the lead for the new CRDC Modern Systems Agronomy Project, which is the whole reason I'm speaking with you today. Get my screen to go. So today I'd like to introduce the project, its scope and its research focus, and I'd like to explain how both the existing climate risk management strategies and outcomes from our prior experiments have shaped our research agenda. I'd also like to invite your input and consultation with regards to new management regimes, generally specific to your area, that you feel require further validation. But before we get going, I just wanted to give a quick bit of background for those that don't know me. So I come from a systems background, and prior to my move into research, I worked in both production and consulting agronomy roles, mostly around the New England and Liverpool Plains region of New South Wales. In combination with this off-farm employment, I was also involved with our family cattle and dryland cropping business at Coolah on the Central West Slopes. And during the 13 years on the farm, drought and its ongoing management became a really significant shaping factor in both our careers and our personal lives. And it led us to upskilling in order to find production solutions. So John went down the weather path, obviously, and myself, I went towards abiotic stress management in dryland cropping systems, and I combined that with ongoing use of precision ag technologies. So in 2013, we moved to Narrabri, and I had a 3-year stint with an ag tech business development company. I had an ag tech business development role for a cotton reseller. And for the past 4 years, I've been here with CSIRO with Mike Band, and now have just received my PhD in cotton systems agronomy. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background context as to who I am and what shapes my research going forward. So the questions that we're posing today are around the what ifs. You know, what if we could have a better handle on the issues that impact our farming systems? What if we could respond to these issues with more agility or more effectively, or possibly more proactively? So we all know that cotton production, irrigated or otherwise, is typified by really significant climate variability. We also know that water is a focal constraint, and that other abiotic stresses such as heat and cold chill interact and compound the effects of those. And the general outcome is basically significant variability in production area, link quality, link yield, and also the profit outcomes that our growers receive. So the industry has a strategic push not only for an increase in the crop area footprint, but a documented requirement for a yield uplift over the next decade. And so consequently, this is where my project fits in. So this 2-year project builds on our recent PGR work to develop novel agronomic management approaches to improve production resilience to climate variability. So under both irrigated and dryland contexts, our work will aim to create and validate PGR-based adaptive management strategies to improve profit and resource use efficiency outcomes. So what exactly do we mean by adaptive management, and is there any benefit over, or what is the benefit over what we're currently doing? So current climate risk management strategies, they manipulate multiple agronomic and genetic solutions to moderate the system limiting factors. So they introduce management diversity. But the limitations are they're not overly agile in their application. So once you're committed to a row configuration, you pretty much have to stick to it for the season. The implementation costs can be considerable or variable, and that, you know, an example would be conventional cotton versus bollard. And in limited water and rain-grown context, the rain dependency often means that we can't implement those management strategies. So for example, planting time, you might not get a second planting opportunity. So what we're looking to achieve is to create new and in-season responsive management methods that can moderate these limitations under really dynamic climatic conditions through the season, and that those management solutions are not dependent on the climate for implementation. So obviously there will still be questions around the implementation costs and the ongoing profitability questions around that, but that's something that we answer as the research goes forward. Why we're doing this is basically from peer-reviewed ecological research, there's a demonstrated increased efficacies in promoting system climatic resilience and economic stability of these production systems. So we like to think that they're kind of an add-on as well as using our existing management strategies. So you're increasing that diversity. So cotton's indeterminate growth pattern, which is basically its capacity for compensatory growth following stress, does make it a little bit difficult to identify key climatic yield levers in our research. But going forward, what we've done is we're using the principles underpinning current management strategies to inform the development of these new adaptive management strategies using PGRs. So for example, manipulating row configuration means that we get increased availability of saltwater resources. So can we do that using a hormone in season to better access those skip row water resources by promoting root growth, for example? Cultivar selection, you're basically tailoring a genetic response to the environment. Can we then further manipulate that using PGRs? So that's what we're looking to achieve by leveraging these existing strategies. So why use plant growth regulators to do this? Well, essentially, they provide us with the opportunity to adjust or fine-tune our crop growth in season and adjust the genotype further to a specific environment. And they're widely used in cotton, but as you all know, achieving a consistency of response is difficult. The plant responses to these hormones or these triggers or receptors is really dependent on the genetics of the plant, and it's also really dependent on the management context and the prevailing environmental conditions. The growth rate of the crop has a big influence, as does the juvenility or maturity of the crop. We also found in our past research that the treatment scenario, so things like the choice of the product, obviously the rate of application, so your dosage, and the frequency and the timing of those dosages had a really massive impact on the plant response. So changing a dosage with similar timing could have polar opposite effects. So I guess the way with our research going forward, it's kind of akin to the old nutrient advantage craft methodology, I suppose. So we're quantifying the choice, the rate, the application, the frequency, and the timing of those PGRs, and researching that scenario as opposed to just a rate. We've also found, and from other research in horticulture, that the solvents or surfactants or the water conditioners that you use are critically important. A difference of 35-degree ambient temperature outside to 40-degree can make a difference of whether your hormones work. And that's where your surfactants really come into play in slowing down that drying time and allowing it to absorb better into the plant. So how are we actually going to make all this research happen, and what do we see are the key opportunities? So our approach is essentially look at a framework of growth and development changes that can then be applied in specific production system contexts. There's two key questions that we're trying to answer, essentially, is can we make the changes successfully and consistently? And secondly, can we get them to work in situ in those production environments? So we're looking at four main approaches that build on our earlier work. And the first is essentially the commercial validation of my work in delaying peak resource demand using gibberellin inhibitors. And I'm really excited that we're also being able to work with CSD in looking at different options around mechanical cutting versus using different hormones, further exploring the use of ethylene to knock fruit off, and then being able to, across the board, sort of look at the water use demands from those different treatment methodologies and try and work out the best solution for specific circumstances. The second approach that we're going after is more of a physiology-based approach, and it's fruiting cycle manipulation, and we're looking at the role of bioactive gibberellins. So gibberellins that are a little bit further up the metabolism chain from the GA3 that's commonly available. And we know that temperature has a large or was a main driving factor in the flip over to floral initiation in cotton. But we're also curious to know, as a day neutral plant, is there a small hormonal role that we could potentially tweak or utilise? So that's going to involve a little bit more glasshouse work and some development of some new assays to look at what the different hormone levels are doing in the plant as they shift into floral initiation from that early vegetative growth. The third approach that we're looking at is basically exploiting variations in determinancy in cotton genetics. So basically, is there any system or crop benefit to growing a cotton crop like a sorghum crop? So we're sort of wondering that in a dryland environment or a limited water environment, if you're a late planting, if we can increase retention of earlier fruit or increase retention of fruit per se under a chronic stress situation, does that have benefits for yield and potentially quality? The fourth approach that we're looking at is extending the work that we looked at cytokinins in my PhD, and we found that there was no consistent response with those, and it wasn't worth pursuing. But it also threw up a few questions around the interaction with auxins and potential for use for them for promoting root growth. So we're going to explore that a little bit further as well. There's also an element of blue sky screening, so that if we can basically try out some new and novel hormones that have come from horticulture or have been spoken to us about from other companies. So that's a little bit of an exploratory component to the project, which is a bit exciting. I guess in this research approach too, the important thing to note is there's a much, compared to my PhD and compared to our earlier work, there's a much higher role of sensing technologies in validating the amount of stress that the plant is under and relating that to the response to these hormones. So we'll be looking at some early canopy temperature work, and can we quantify those stress responses early on in the crop, and how that then affects the response of the plant to the hormone applications that we're putting on early. So to provide a bit of a background to our current research approaches, I'm also going to touch briefly on some key outcomes from our earlier research, just to give you a bit of an update of where we're at. So what we're looking at here is some anti-ethylene work. We're using AVG in a dryland context. So in the work that Mick Bange has done, he's been looking at using AVG in irrigated or water limited scenarios. So under acute stress situations, so could we replace an irrigation, or can it have beneficial impacts in waterlogging or in heat stress? And so what we did with this one during my PhD was to basically put 3 applications on over about a 30-day period in early vegetative growth and into early flowering, as a way of basically to see if there was any response from the plant from inhibiting that ethylene response in early flowering. So in one season, we did get significantly different results in boll numbers. So we got a high number of bolls retained using the AVG, but they were smaller. So which goes back to your the resource availability balance that we strike. The turnout was different, but it wasn't significant. And in our 2-metre handpicks, we did get significantly different yield. There was also a small difference in progression to cut out as well after sowing. So basically, we're going to be looking at this going forward in both a dry land, a limited water situation to further validate the notion of the acute stress, but also in essentially not a dialer yield, but boll growth for available water. And is there a trigger point where this stops working, and basically where it fits into the system? So that's one approach that we're going to leverage going forward. And secondly, we'll be basically delving deeper into the economics or sensitivity analysis around the economics of this delaying fruit development or delaying peak resource demand. And that was using the Trenexa pack that we were able to get those delays. We're also going to be looking again at those stress triggers or the proportion of the crop that we may apply this to, and look at the economic returns around that. So in our research in my PhD, we looked at 6 different hormones, 6 different gibberellin inhibitors, including mepiquat. And you can see they can basically be grouped into 3 different groups based on their chemical structure. And that chemical structure means that they have a different impact on the crop as far as their length of efficacy, and also we did find some differences in how they affected leaf area accumulation in the crop in early flowering. So what we were essentially able to do with these was invoke, we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to invoke a stasis or delay development, or using Ethaphon, we actually removed early fruit. So what we were able to do was invoke a stasis. So we essentially slowed vegetative growth, we slowed the plant growth down, we slowed the water use down, we slowed the leaf area development down, and that node expansion down. And so that meant that it was the same plant, it was just growing essentially a little bit slower and a little bit more delayed, and that meant that its peak resource demand was further delayed into that more beneficial climatic environment that we were looking for. So we ran this over 4 years. There was 6 trials in total, and we have 4 concept evaluation experiments. Out of those, evaluating those 6 hormones, the Trinexpac, as I said, came out as being most efficacious. And at control first square, basically we were able to end up with less squares, less sites, less retention to those sites, and a decreased leaf area. And that persisted, the leaf area reduction persisted into early flowering. So at control first flower, the Trinexpac was lower than the control. That gave us a 15-day delay in progression to cutout and a 12-day delay in progression to maturity. So of those crops that we took through to harvest, there was 3 of those. One of them got hailed out. There was no overall differences in open bowl average weights. There was no differences in lint yield that was achieved out of 2 of the 3 experiments. The 3rd experiment, we had a high number of residual green bowl numbers. So that crop was actually planted really early up at Terry High, was 15th of September. And the season, it was the 18-19 season, and as you know, it was quite dry from about February on. It just cut out, and you can see by the crop here. But we did have residual numbers of green bowls. So the crop was defoliated and harvested based on the control. So obviously we were quite late in maturity. So you can see, I'm not sure whether you can see my mouse, but down the front there is the Trinexpac, and at the behind there is the control, or the rest of the commercial crop, where you can see the open bowls, and it's pretty much ready to go. So basically over the three different crops that we harvested, there was no difference in lint yield. There was increased turnout. So what we were able to get from that scenario was that we basically had a similar bowl load, but we delayed it, which was what we were trying to achieve. So I guess going forward now, we need to delve further into those water use questions and the structure of the fruit load that we actually managed to delay. Is it more, is it positioned differently on the plant? Is it more on the laterals as a later load? What impact will that have on potential quality questions? So our next lot of research will be a little bit more detailed into this specific treatment. So I guess wrapping up, the whole reason for my talk today was to introduce the project and to basically get your feedback around where you think these treatments may be best situated within your own areas. So basically the project's running over 2 seasons. It's going to be over a wide proportion of the cotton footprint. We're looking at both irrigated and dryland scenarios, but basically it's limited water, abiotic stress, irrigated situations. Obviously, the PGR treatment scenarios that we're looking at the moment have been aimed at particular tweaks in growth and development with specific system applications in mind. So the delaying flowering, we're looking at that early plant scenario in dryland. With manipulating determinancy, we're looking at a short season scenario in limited water, or a late plant in dryland. And we're also looking at promoting early vegetative growth and the role of the different structures of the gibberellins in capacity to both promote growth and promote leaf area, and as a way of getting around the early lag phase in southern irrigated systems. So once the crop's up out of the ground, can we kick along that growth and get that flowering happening? As I explained before, the ability of these PGRs to really achieve these changes and to do it consistently needs to be really validated, and with some really decent metrics put around environmental conditions and stress levels. And I guess in the back of my mind is going forward, having that information set up so that we can feed it into models and we can use it to create predictive frameworks and when to apply this technology. Obviously, they'll have many opportunities for production application in different systems across different areas, but I guess, yeah, as I said, my question is to get your feedback. Is there any specific new scenarios where you would like to see this applied or evaluated? And I guess with that in mind, I'm going to put my contact details up there and say, please feel free to give me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter or email, give me a call. Happy to discuss it further, and I'd love to have some feedback. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was great. Just one question. I think my Vanderbilt stage was working on some PDRs to try and reduce shedding during cloudy conditions. Just a comment on that, and obviously the backside of that, often if a plant sheds for good reason, it's probably better that that fruit's on the ground than grows new stuff.
Sorry, I'm going to have to get you to repeat that one. I've missed the back end of it.
But just about the, if a plant decides it's going to shed fruit, it's often for a good reason. Is the plant often better off having got rid of that fruit and just compensating it with new growth?
My first initial response is to say possibly, if you have the season length and resources at the other end to enable that compensatory growth to then give you a productive yield. I guess probably where I start questioning or wondering about it is if, you know, if temperature or season length temperature is going to be shortened, or temperature is going to shorten season length rather, and you're not going to have the time to make up that compensatory yield. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing situation, and I realise, and even talking to Warwick Stiller about it all as well, that yeah, there is the opportunity there to go too far and to essentially mess things up pretty well. So that's why, yeah, those trigger points and the refining of when you actually do apply it and getting those frameworks right is really important.
No worries. Any other questions from the room? No, must have followed over. Thank you very much, Claire. That's great.